Kim Ji-hyun wiped the sweat from his forehead as he carefully placed another sea urchin into the specimen container. The morning sun was already beating down on the small research station perched on the cliffs above Busan's rocky coastline. He had been working since dawn, collecting samples from the tide pools for his marine biology research. The isolated station was perfect for his work, far from the busy city and tourist beaches, where people might disturb the delicate ocean life he studied. Bomi, his golden retriever, usually spent these mornings napping in the shade or chasing seabirds along the water's edge. But today something was different. Ji-hyun first noticed it when Bomi stopped mid-chase and stood perfectly still, her ears perked up and nose twitching. Then she started whining, a low, worried sound that Ji-hyun had never heard from her before. "What's wrong, girl?" Ji-hyun called out, but Bomi wasn't paying attention to him anymore. She had started pacing back and forth along the rocky shoreline, stopping every few steps to look out at the tide pools. Her tail was low, and she kept making that strange whining noise. Ji-hyun tried to focus on his work, but Bomi's behavior was becoming more frantic by the minute. She would run a few meters toward the water, then race back to where Ji-hyun was working. She pawed at his legs and barked once sharply. When he didn't immediately follow, she grabbed the hem of his shirt with her teeth and tugged. "Bomi, stop." Ji-hyun said, gently pushing her away. "I need to finish cataloging these samples before the tide comes back in." But Bomi wouldn't give up. She ran toward the tide pools again, then back to Ji-hyun. This time she barked 3 times in quick succession, a sound of pure urgency that made Ji-hyun's stomach tighten with worry. In all the years he'd had Bomi, she had never acted like this. Something was seriously wrong. Ji-hyun set down his collection tools and really looked at his dog. Bomi was trembling slightly, her brown eyes wide and focused on something beyond the rocks. She took a few steps toward the water, then looked back at him expectantly. When he didn't move, she came back and pawed at his legs again, more insistently this time. Okay, Ji-hyun said, finally understanding that Bomi needed him to follow. Her. "Show me what's got you so worked up." The moment he stood up, Bomi took off toward the tide pools, looking back every few seconds to make sure he was following. Ji-hyun had to scramble over the slippery rocks to keep up with her. The tide was at its lowest point, revealing pools filled with colorful sea anemones, small crabs, and patches of seaweed that normally stayed underwater. Bomi led him around a large boulder covered in barnacles, her nose close to the ground as if following a scent. Then she stopped suddenly and sat down, looking at something hidden between the rocks. Ji-hyun moved closer, expecting to see an injured seabird, or maybe a stranded dolphin calf. What he saw instead made him freeze in shock. Curled up in a shallow pool between the rocks was a small figure that looked almost human, but definitely wasn't. The being appeared to be unconscious, her skin shimmering with an otherworldly pearl-like quality that caught the sunlight. Ji-hyun's mind struggled to process what he was seeing as Bomi whined softly beside him, as if asking him to help. Ji-hyun knelt down beside the strange figure, his heart pounding as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The being was definitely female and appeared to be around 16 or 17 years old, but she was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Her skin wasn't just pale, it actually sparkled in the sunlight like crushed pearls mixed with water. Tiny, delicate scales covered her arms and face, creating patterns that shifted and changed as the light hit them from different angles. What really caught his attention were the thin slits along both sides of her neck. They were opening and closing, very slowly, almost like a fish gasping for air. Ji-hyun realized with a shock that these must be gills, and they weren't working properly. The girl's breathing was quick and shallow through her nose and mouth, as if she was struggling to get enough oxygen. Her clothes were unlike anything from Earth. The fabric looked like it was woven from some kind of seaweed, but it shimmered, with the same pearl-like quality as her skin. Parts of the material were torn, and Ji-hyun could see small cuts and bruises on her arms and legs. Whatever had happened to her, she had been hurt pretty badly. "Oh no," Ji-hyun whispered, touching her forehead gently. Her skin felt dry and hot, which seemed wrong for someone who obviously lived in water. "You're dehydrating, aren't you?" Bomi whined softly and nudged Ji-hyun's shoulder, as if urging him to do something quickly. The dog seemed to understand that time was running out. Ji-hyun knew he had to act fast. The research station had an emergency tank that he used for temporarily housing larger marine animals when they needed medical attention. If this girl really did breathe through gills, then getting her into seawater might save her life. "It's going to be okay," he said softly to the unconscious girl, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "I'm going to help you." Very carefully, Ji-hyun slipped his arms under her shoulders and knees. She was lighter than he expected, and her skin felt strange against his hands, smooth but with a slight texture from the tiny scales. As he lifted her, her head fell back, and he could see that her lips had a slight blue tint. She was definitely not getting enough oxygen. Bommy walked alongside them as Ji-hyun carried the alien girl back to the research station, occasionally looking up at her face with worried eyes. The dog seemed to understand that this was a rescue mission, and she stayed close without getting in the way. The emergency tank was in the station's main laboratory, normally used for studying larger specimens like small sharks or octopi. Ji-hyun had to balance the girl in one arm while he quickly turned on the seawater circulation system with his free hand. The tank began filling with fresh, clean ocean water that was pumped directly from the sea outside. Come on," Ji-hyun muttered, as the water level slowly rose. The girl's breathing was getting even more labored, and those gill slits were barely moving at all now. When the tank was about half full, Ji-hyun carefully lowered the girl into the water. The moment the seawater touched her gills, something amazing happened. The slits along her neck began opening and closing more steadily, and some color returned to her lips. Her whole body seemed to relax as the water supported her weight. Bommy sat down beside the tank and watched intently, her tail wagging slightly for the first time since they had found the girl. Ji-hyun could see that his dog was pleased with their rescue effort. 3 hours had passed since Ji-hyun placed the alien girl in the emergency tank. He sat at his desk nearby, trying to focus on his research notes, but his eyes kept drifting back to the still figure floating in the seawater. Bommy hadn't moved from her spot beside the tank, lying with her chin resting on her paws, watching over their unexpected guest like a faithful guardian. Suddenly, Bommy's ears perked up, and her tail gave a small wag. Ji-hyun looked over just in time to see the girl's eyelids flutter open. Her eyes were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, large and silver like polished coins, with depths that seemed to reflect light in ways that human eyes never could. For a moment she stared, up at the ceiling looking confused and disoriented. Then she noticed Ji-hyun sitting a few feet away, and pure terror flashed across her face. She tried to scramble backward in the tank, water splashing everywhere as she pressed herself against the far wall. Her gills were working frantically, and her silver eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape route. Hey, it's okay," Ji-hyun said softly, holding up both hands to show he meant no harm. "You're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." But the girl clearly didn't understand his words, and his voice only seemed to frighten her more. She looked ready to try climbing out of the tank, even though it might mean suffocating again. That's when Bommy did something wonderful. The golden retriever stood up slowly and walked closer to the tank, her tail wagging gently. She sat down, right next to the water, and looked at the alien girl with the same calm, friendly expression she gave to every creature she met. Then Bommy did her special trick, the one that always made children smile. She tilted her head to one side and made a soft, questioning whine. The effect was immediate. The fear in the girl's silver eyes began to fade as she focused on Bommy. She seemed amazed by the dog's friendly behavior. Slowly she reached one wet hand out of the tank toward Bommy. The dog stayed perfectly still as those strange, scaled fingers gently touched her fur. A smile spread across the alien girl's face. The first expression of joy Ji-hyun had seen from her. She said something in a language that sounded like water flowing over smooth stones, musical and soft. Then she pointed to herself and said clearly, "Naya! Naya!" Ji-hyun repeated, and her smile grew wider. He pointed to himself. "Ji-hyun." Then he gestured toward his dog, "Bommy." Naya tried to repeat their names, her pronunciation slightly off but close enough. She seemed delighted that they were communicating, even in this simple way. Ji-hyun grabbed his tablet from the desk and opened a drawing app. He sketched a simple stick figure, then pointed to himself. Naya nodded eagerly and reached for the tablet. Her wet fingers worked surprisingly well on the screen as she drew her own figure, but with gills on the neck and scales on the arms. Over the next hour, they developed a basic system of communication using pictures, gestures, and numbers. Naya was incredibly intelligent and picked up on Ji-hyun's methods quickly. She drew pictures of space of a ship that looked nothing like human spacecraft and of that ship crashing into the ocean. When she drew a picture of herself dying on the rocks, then drew Bomi finding her tears filled her silver eyes. She reached out and stroked Bomi's head again, saying something in her musical language that clearly meant thank you. Then she drew something that made Ji-hyun's blood run cold, a clock showing that she would have died in just a few more hours, without help. Over the following days, Naya's strength returned gradually. Her gills worked better now, and the pearl-like shimmer of her skin became brighter and more vibrant. But what fascinated her most wasn't her own recovery. It was watching Ji-hyun and Bomi together. She would float in her tank for hours, her silver eyes following their every interaction, with the curiosity of someone seeing something completely new. When Ji-hyun worked at his computer, Bomi would rest her head on his feet. When he got up to make coffee, Bomi followed. When he sat down to eat, Bomi sat beside his chair, not begging but simply wanting to be close. Naya seemed amazed by this constant companionship. Using their growing system of drawings and gestures, Naya tried to ask Ji-hyun about his relationship with Bomi. She drew pictures of herself with other beings that looked like her, but they were always separate, always apart. Then she drew Ji-hyun and Bomi side by side, with question marks around them. Ji-hyun thought about how to explain friendship to someone who had apparently never experienced it. He drew a heart and pointed between himself and Bomi. Then he drew pictures showing how they took care of each other. Bomi protecting him from danger, him feeding and caring for Bomi, both of them playing together. Naya's eyes grew wide as she began to understand. She tried to draw similar pictures of her own people, but every drawing showed them living alone or in formal groups. There was no warmth, no casual touching, no playing together like she saw between Ji-hyun and Bomi. On the third day, something happened that changed everything. Ji-hyun was cleaning Naya's tank when he accidentally knocked over a bottle of chemicals. The liquid spilled across the floor, and the fumes immediately made his eyes water and his throat burn. He started coughing and stumbled backward, trying to get away from the dangerous vapors. Bomi reacted instantly. She barked loudly to alert Ji-hyun to move faster, then ran to the emergency ventilation switch on the wall. The clever dog had watched Ji-hyun use it before during other accidents. She jumped up and hit the switch with her paws, turning on the powerful fans that sucked the toxic fumes out of the room. Naya watched all of this from her tank, her silver eyes filled with wonder. Here was Bomi, risking her own safety by staying in the room with dangerous chemicals, just to save her human friend. And she had done it without being asked, without expecting any reward, simply because she loved Ji-hyun. That evening, as Ji-hyun sat reading beside her tank, Naya began drawing, frantically on the tablet. She drew pictures of space, of stars and of many different worlds. Then she drew beings that looked like herself, living on a beautiful ocean planet. Using simple symbols, she managed to communicate something incredible. Her people called themselves the Coral Singers, and they had been watching Earth for many years. They lived in underwater cities and had technology that could travel between stars, but they lived very differently from humans. Each Coral Singer was independent and alone. They worked together when necessary, but they didn't form emotional bonds like the one between Ji-hyun and Bomi. Naya drew pictures showing her people's debates about humans. Some Coral Singers thought humans were too emotional and unpredictable for contact. Others thought humans were too violent. They had been studying human behavior for decades, trying to decide if it was safe to reveal themselves. But now Naya had seen something her people had never witnessed before. She had seen Bomi risk her life to save a complete stranger from another world, with no possibility of reward or recognition. She had seen the pure love between a human and his companion animal, and she had seen that same protective instinct save Ji-hyun's life when the chemicals spilled. Through her drawings, Naya tried to explain that this changed everything her people thought they knew about humans. Over the following days, Naya's strength returned gradually. Her gills worked better now, and the pearl-like shimmer of her skin became brighter and more vibrant. But what fascinated her most wasn't her own recovery. It was watching Ji-hyun and Bomi together. She would float in her tank for hours, her silver eyes following their every interaction, with the curiosity of someone seeing something completely new. When Ji-hyun worked at his computer, Bomi would rest her head on his feet. When he got up to make coffee, Bomi followed. When he sat down to eat, Bomi sat beside his chair, not begging but simply wanting to be close. Naya seemed amazed by this constant companionship. Using their growing system of drawings and gestures, Naya tried to ask Ji-hyun about his relationship with Bomi. She drew pictures of herself with other beings that looked like her, but they were always separate, always apart. Then she drew Ji-hyun and Bomi side by side, with question marks around them. Ji-hyun thought about how to explain friendship to someone who had apparently never experienced it. He drew a heart and pointed between himself and Bomi. Then he drew pictures showing how they took care of each other. Bomi protecting him from danger, him feeding and caring for Bomi, both of them playing together. Naya's eyes grew wide as she began to understand. She tried to draw similar pictures of her own people, but every drawing showed them living alone or in formal groups. There was no warmth, no casual touching, no playing together like she saw between Ji-hyun and Bomi. On the third day, something happened that changed everything. Ji-hyun was cleaning Naya's tank when he accidentally knocked over a bottle of chemicals. The liquid spilled across the floor, and the fumes immediately made his eyes water and his throat burn. He started coughing and stumbled backward, trying to get away from the dangerous vapors. Bomi reacted instantly. She barked loudly to alert Ji-hyun to move faster, then ran to the emergency ventilation switch on the wall. The clever dog had watched Ji-hyun use it before during other accidents. She jumped up and hit the switch with her paws, turning on the powerful fans that sucked the toxic fumes out of the room. Naya watched all of this from her tank, her silver eyes filled with wonder. Here was Bomi, risking her own safety by staying in the room with dangerous chemicals, just to save her human friend. And she had done it without being asked, without expecting any reward, simply because she loved Ji-hyun. That evening, as Ji-hyun sat reading beside her tank, Naya began drawing, frantically on the tablet. She drew pictures of space, of stars and of many different worlds. Then she drew beings that looked like herself, living on a beautiful ocean planet. Using simple symbols, she managed to communicate something incredible. Her people called themselves the Coral Singers, and they had been watching Earth for many years. They lived in underwater cities and had technology that could travel between stars, but they lived very differently from humans. Each Coral Singer was independent and alone. They worked together when necessary, but they didn't form emotional bonds like the one between Ji-hyun and Bomi. Naya drew pictures showing her people's debates about humans. Some Coral Singers thought humans were too emotional and unpredictable for contact. Others thought humans were too violent. They had been studying human behavior for decades, trying to decide if it was safe to reveal themselves. But now Naya had seen something her people had never witnessed before. She had seen Bomi risk her life to save a complete stranger from another world, with no possibility of reward or recognition. She had seen the pure love between a human and his companion animal, and she had seen that same protective instinct save Ji-hyun's life when the chemicals spilled. Through her drawings, Naya tried to explain that this changed everything her people thought they knew about humans. On the seventh day, something strange happened in the sky above the research station. Ji-hyun noticed it first when he was outside collecting water samples. The air seemed to shimmer and bend in one spot, like heat. Waves rising from hot pavement, but it was a cool morning with no sun strong enough to cause that effect. Bomi saw it too. She started barking at the empty sky, her hackles raised and her body tense. But this wasn't the worried bark she had used when she found Naya. This was her protective bark, the one she used when strangers approached their home. Inside the station, Naya suddenly became very excited. She had been floating peacefully in her tank when she started making urgent clicking sounds, and gesturing frantically toward the ceiling. Her silver eyes were bright with something that looked like hope mixed with fear. Ji-hyun rushed inside just as a soft melodic sound filled the air around them. It wasn't quite music, but it wasn't quite speech either. It sounded like whale songs mixed with wind chimes, beautiful but completely alien. Naya responded with similar sounds, and Ji-hyun realized she was talking to someone he couldn't see. The conversation in that strange musical language went on for several minutes. Ji-hyun could tell from Naya's tone and gestures that she was explaining something important. Sometimes her voice rose with excitement, other times it became pleading. Through it all, Bomi stayed close to Ji-hyun, still alert but no longer barking. Finally, the sounds from above stopped. Naya turned to Ji-hyun with tears flowing down her scaled cheeks. Using the tablet they had been sharing, she drew quickly. The picture showed a large ship hidden in the clouds above them. Then she drew herself being taken away from the research station. Ji-hyun felt his heart sink. He had known this moment would come, but he wasn't prepared for how much it would hurt. Over the past week, Naya had become like a younger sister to him. The thought of her leaving made him feel empty inside, but Naya wasn't finished drawing. She made another picture showing herself talking to what looked like an older member of her species, someone with more elaborate markings on their skin. Through gestures and more pictures, she managed to explain that this was Elder Taemin, the captain of the rescue ship and a leader among her people. The elder expected Naya to return immediately and report that humans were dangerous and not ready for peaceful contact. This had been the plan all along. The Coral Singers had sent young scouts to many worlds, and most returned with negative reports about the species they encountered. But Naya had drawn something else, something that made Ji-hyun's breath catch in his throat. She showed herself refusing to leave, staying at the research station to continue learning about humans. She had drawn pictures of Bomi's rescue, of Ji-hyun's kindness, and of the bond between human and dog that her people had never seen before. The musical sounds returned, and this time they sounded stern and disapproving. Elder Taemin was clearly not happy with Naya's request. The Coral Singers had strict rules about not interfering with other species, and staying on Earth would break those ancient laws. Naya's responses became more passionate and urgent. She pointed repeatedly at Bomi, then at drawings she had made of their rescue. She was arguing her case, trying to convince her captain that everything the Coral Singers believed about humans might be wrong. Ji-hyun watched this invisible debate with growing anxiety. He couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the determination in Naya's voice fighting against the authority in the elder's tone. Whatever decision they reached would change all of their lives forever. The debate above the research station continued for hours. Ji-hyun could hear multiple voices now, all speaking in that flowing musical language of the Coral Singers. Sometimes, the conversation would pause, and he guessed they were waiting for responses from their homeworld far across the galaxy. The delay between question and answer reminded him of old satellite phone calls, except these signals were traveling between stars. Naya spent most of the time floating tensely in her tank, occasionally adding her own voice to the discussion. Ji-hyun could tell she was frustrated. Her normally graceful movements became sharp and agitated, and she kept pointing at Bomi as if the dog was the most important evidence in her argument. Bomi, for her part, seemed to understand that she was the center of attention. She sat perfectly still beside the tank, her golden fur gleaming in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the station's windows. Every so often, she would look up at the ceiling where the invisible ship waited, her head tilted as if she could almost understand the alien voices. Through their system of drawings, Naya tried to explain what was happening. She showed Ji-hyun pictures of a great council of her people, all gathered in what looked like an underwater palace, made of coral and pearls. The council members were divided into different groups, and Naya drew their positions with different symbols. One group, led by someone Naya called Counselor Hyejin, believed that humans were too dangerous for contact. Naya drew these council members with stern expressions and closed hands, showing they were not open to new ideas. They argued that one dog saving one alien didn't prove anything about humanity as a whole. They pointed to human wars, pollution, and violence as evidence that the species wasn't ready for peaceful contact with advanced civilizations. Ji-hyun felt his stomach clench as he watched Naya draw pictures of human conflicts and environmental destruction. He knew his species had many flaws, and seeing them illustrated through alien eyes made them seem even worse. How could he argue with beings who had been watching Earth from space, seeing all of humanity's mistakes? But Naya wasn't giving up. She drew another group of council members, these ones with more open expressions and gestures of curiosity. These moderate voices were beginning to listen to her arguments about the bond she had witnessed between humans and their companion animals. They found it fascinating that humans would share their homes and lives with creatures from completely different species, caring for them without any practical benefit. Naya drew picture after picture of Bomi's behavior. Bomi alerting them to danger. Bomi staying by Ji-hyun's side during work. Bomi playing and showing joy just from being near her human friend. She tried to show the council that this relationship was based on pure love and loyalty, something the choral singers had never seen before in their studies of other worlds. The most interesting part of Naya's argument was about what she called cross-species empathy. She drew humans caring for injured birds, rescuing stranded whales and protecting endangered animals. Then she drew the ultimate example, Bomi risking her own life to save a being she had never seen before, from a world she couldn't even imagine. Through the long afternoon, Ji-hyun could hear the debate growing more intense. Voices rose and fell like ocean waves, with Naya's clear young voice often cutting through the deeper tones of the adult council members. She was proposing something that had never been tried before, a formal cultural exchange that would begin with her staying on Earth to study human behavior more closely. The idea was radical and dangerous, breaking centuries of choral singer tradition about non-interference with developing species. The debate in the sky above the research station stretched on for 3 long weeks. Every day, Ji-hyun would hear those musical voices floating down from the invisible ship, sometimes calm and thoughtful, other times heated and urgent. Naya barely slept during this time, constantly participating in the discussions that were happening millions of miles away through some kind of instant communication system her people had developed. Ji-hyun tried to maintain his normal research routine, but it was impossible to focus. His entire world had changed since finding Naya, and now he might lose her just as quickly as she had appeared. Bomi seemed to sense the tension too. The usually playful dog stayed close to both Ji-hyun and Naya's tank, as if she could somehow keep their little family together through sheer determination. On the morning of the 22nd day, something different happened. The alien voices above grew quiet, and Naya floated perfectly still in her tank, her silver eyes closed as if she was listening to something only she could hear. Then her eyes snapped open, and she began making excited clicking sounds. Ji-hyun rushed over to the tank. "What is it? What's happening?" Naya grabbed the tablet they used for communication and started drawing frantically. Her first picture showed the great council chamber she had drawn before, but now all the choral singers were nodding their heads in agreement. Then she drew herself staying at the research station, with a calendar showing the passage of 3 months. 3 months? Ji-hyun asked, pointing at the calendar. Naya nodded enthusiastically, then drew more pictures. The compromise the council had reached was unlike anything in choral singer history. Naya would be allowed to stay on Earth as their first official cultural observer, but only for 1 complete season. During this time, she would study human behavior and report back to her people every week. If her reports consistently showed evidence of human compassion, wisdom, and readiness for peaceful contact, the council would consider revealing themselves to Earth's governments. But there were conditions. Naya drew a picture of Ji-hyun with official markings around him, showing that he would become her formal liaison with humanity. He would be responsible for her safety and for helping her understand human culture. The council had been impressed by the trust and friendship that had developed between them, and they believed Ji-hyun could serve as a bridge between their species. The most important condition was that Elder Taemin would remain in orbit around Earth, watching everything through advanced sensors. If Naya was ever in danger, or if humans showed any sign of hostility toward her, the Elder would immediately extract her, and the choral singers would never return. As Naya explained all of this through her drawings, Ji-hyun felt a mixture of excitement and terror. He was being asked to represent all of humanity to an advanced alien civilization. Everything he did, everything he said, would influence whether humans would ever be welcomed into the larger galactic community. But then he looked at Bomi, who was sitting calmly beside the tank with her tail wagging slowly. The dog who had started this entire adventure by simply caring about a stranger in need. If Bomi could bridge the gap between species through pure love and instinct, maybe humans had something valuable to offer the universe after all. The musical voice of Elder Taemin filled the room one final time, speaking directly to Ji-hyun even, though he couldn't understand the words. Naya translated through gestures, showing that the Elder was greeting him officially as Earth's first interspecies ambassador. Ji-hyun looked up at the ceiling where the invisible ship waited and spoke clearly. "Thank you for trusting us. We won't let you down." Even though Elder Taemin couldn't understand English, something in Ji-hyun's tone must have conveyed his sincerity, because Naya smiled brighter than ever before. The first month of Naya's stay transformed the quiet research station into something entirely new. Working together, she and Ji-hyun began studying the ocean in ways that had never been possible before. Naya's understanding of marine life came from living among sea creatures for her entire life, while Ji-hyun brought human scientific methods and technology to their partnership. Their breakthrough came when Naya showed Ji-hyun how dolphins and whales were actually much more intelligent than humans had realized. She could communicate with them directly through a series of clicks and musical sounds, translating their complex thoughts about ocean currents, fish migration patterns, and even their observations of human ships passing overhead. Ji-hyun was amazed. As he watched Naya floating in a specially built pool they had constructed near the tide pools, surrounded by a family of dolphins who had come to visit her. The dolphins seemed to treat her as one of their own, playfully splashing and sharing information about the best fishing spots along the coast. "This changes everything we thought we knew about marine intelligence," Ji-hyun said as he recorded. Their interactions, the implications were staggering. If dolphins and whales were truly this aware and communicative, it meant humans had been sharing the planet with another intelligent species all along without realizing it. Their research results were so remarkable that Ji-hyun felt he had to share them with the broader scientific community. He sent a carefully written report to his former professor at Seoul National University, explaining that he had discovered a new method for communicating with marine mammals. He left out any mention of Naya's true nature, simply saying he had developed the technique through years of observation. Within 2 weeks, marine biologists from across Korea were asking to visit the research station. Ji-hyun was nervous about having visitors, but Naya assured him through their drawings that she could hide in the deeper parts of her tank system when necessary. Her people had technology that could make her nearly invisible when she needed to, avoid detection. The first official visitor was Dr. Young-ho Park from the Korean Marine Research Institute. He arrived expecting to see some minor improvements in dolphin communication, but what he witnessed left him speechless. Ji-hyun, apparently, talking to empty water, was able to predict exactly where schools of fish would appear and when migrating whales would pass by the station. "How is this possible?" Dr. Park asked, staring at the sonar readings that confirmed everything Ji-hyun had predicted. "I've learned to read the subtle signs in the water," Ji-hyun replied carefully. "Ocean currents, temperature changes, the behavior of smaller fish. It all tells a story if you know how to listen." Behind Dr. Park, Naya floated invisibly in her tank, using her technology to remain unseen while she observed this first test of their cover story. She was fascinated by how humans reacted to new discoveries, and she took detailed notes to send back to the Coral Singer Council. Word of Ji-hyun's remarkable abilities spread quickly through the scientific community. Soon, researchers from the United Nations Marine Conservation Program were requesting visits. Then came delegations from Japan, China, and even distant countries, whose fishing industries could benefit from better understanding of ocean ecosystems. Throughout all of this, Bomi remained the constant companion who had started it all. The international visitors were charmed by the friendly golden retriever, who seemed to have an uncanny ability to sense when marine animals were approaching. News crews began featuring Bomi in their stories about the mysterious research breakthrough happening at the isolated Korean coastal station. What the visitors didn't know was that Bomi had developed a special friendship with Naya. The dog could somehow sense when the alien girl was nearby, even when she was invisible to human eyes. Bomi would wag her tail and look directly at Naya's hidden form, as if the technology that fooled human vision couldn't fool a dog's deeper instincts. 6 months had passed since Naya first opened her silver eyes in the emergency tank, and the world had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The small research station that had once been Ji-hyun's quiet refuge was now the center of the most important discovery in human history, though most people still didn't know the full truth. Naya's weekly reports to the Coral Singer Council had been overwhelmingly positive. She had documented hundreds of examples of human compassion, from children caring for injured birds to entire communities coming together to rescue beached whales. But the evidence that impressed the council most was what they observed through their advanced senses. Humans forming deep emotional bonds, not just with their own species, but with animals, plants, and even the environment itself. The breakthrough moment came when Naya was finally able to show the council what had convinced her from the very beginning. Using their advanced recording technology, she captured the exact moment when Bomi had first found her on the rocks. The council watched in amazement as a creature from another world risked her own safety to alert her human companion to save a being she had never seen before. "This is unprecedented," Elder Taemin had told Naya during one of their communications. "In all our centuries of observing developing civilizations, we have never seen this level of interspecies empathy. Your human friends and their companion, animal, have shown us something we didn't even know was possible." The council's final decision was announced on a crisp morning in early spring. Naya had been floating quietly in her pool when suddenly her entire body began to glow with an inner light that Ji-hyun had never seen before. She started making the most beautiful sounds, like singing combined with the gentle rush of ocean waves. Through their now sophisticated communication system, Naya explained that the Coral Alliance, a peaceful confederation of aquatic civilizations from dozens of different worlds, had voted to invite humanity to join them. It was the first time in over 1,000 years that a land-based species had been offered membership. The formal invitation ceremony took place at the research station, with representatives from the Korean government, the United Nations, and marine research institutions from around the world in attendance. Of course, they still believed they were witnessing an advanced breakthrough in marine communication technology, not actual first contact with an alien civilization. But Ji-hyun, Naya, and Elder Taemin knew the truth, as government officials signed documents establishing the station as Earth's first interspecies marine research center. They were actually creating humanity's first embassy to the stars. Bomi played her part perfectly during the ceremony. She sat calmly beside the pool where Naya floated, occasionally looking up at the sky where Elder Taemin's ship remained invisibly anchored. News cameras captured dozens of photos of the golden retriever, who had somehow become the symbol of this. A new era in marine research. "Ladies and gentlemen," the UN representative announced to the gathered crowd, "today marks the beginning of a new chapter in our understanding of ocean intelligence. This research station will serve as the model for similar facilities around the world, helping us learn to communicate with the remarkable minds that share our planet's waters." If only they knew, Ji-hyun thought, as he watched Naya translate the speech for the invisible Coral Singer observers above. They weren't just learning to communicate with Earth's ocean dwellers, they were taking humanity's first steps into a vast community of civilizations that spanned the galaxy. That evening, after all the officials and reporters had gone home, Ji-hyun sat by Naya's pool with Bomi curled up beside him. The dog was wearing a new collar, a gift from the UN delegation, with a small medallion that read, "Earth's first interspecies ambassador." "You know what's amazing?" Ji-hyun said to Naya as she floated peacefully in the moonlight. "None of this would have happened if Bomi hadn't decided to care about a stranger.